Good morning. It's great to be with you. I am Andrew Selee. I'm the president of the Migration Policy Institute. Here to talk about two projects that we've done with the Mission Foods Texas-Mexico Center at Southern Methodist University. We have enormous respect for the Texas-Mexico Center at SMU. We've done a number of things together. From the beginning with Luisa and Jenny and all of you, we've had an opportunity to be involved in a number of efforts, and we were very pleased to be able to do two specific projects together last year. Two reports that came out that we think stand the test of time and contribute new understanding to the relationship between Mexico and the United States, looking particularly at how migration has changed between the two countries. One of the reports was very specific. We looked at what's changed in terms of Mexican immigrants with professional degrees, with college degrees. And it was quite surprising. It was something we'd noticed and we had started talking about with Luisa and Jenny early on, and it's something we decided we wanted to do a joint report on. And it's fascinating. I mean, the nutshell is that the finding in a nutshell is that if you look back at 2000, at that point, about 6% of the recent Mexican immigrants to the United States had a college degree. And when we say recent, we're talking about people who came in the last 5 years. We define it very specifically. So only about 6% had a college degree. Fast forward to 2017, and that number is 17%. So that's 1 in 6 Mexican immigrants who've come in the past 5 years have a college degree. We looked at this for Texas as well, and in Texas we find it's gone from 7%, it was always a little bit higher, to 18%, but it mirrors the change overall. What we're seeing is more and more a group of Mexican immigrants who have greater education. This is true also, by the way, even though we didn't run the numbers, if you look at overall education levels have also changed among recent immigrants, right? I mean, more people, fewer and fewer people have never finished elementary school, which used to be quite true. Most people now have finished elementary school. Many people have secondary and have secondary education as well, but we were looking specifically at professionals. What we also found, though, is that not all of these professionals are necessarily employed in professional occupations in the United States, and that's because of language. Not everyone speaks English well enough to qualify to work in their profession of choice. It is also because of legal status. There's a number of people who have college degrees but do not have legal status in the United States. And it's also because of recognition of professional degrees, that you may be an engineer in Mexico, but it's hard to be recognized in the United States, or an architect in Mexico, or much less a doctor in Mexico to be recognized in the United States. And so these are professions that don't always travel well. Even if you're a teacher, right? I mean, you have to get recertified in the United States, or a nurse, you have to get recertified in the United States. So one of the pending opportunities, I mean, there are a few of them, but one of them is, how do we think about, agreements that allow people to certify more easily in the United States, and this can often be done at a state level, say in Texas, where and in the middle of a pandemic, you might think about healthcare workers, for example, nurses and doctors, anesthesiologists, and others. How do you have more rapid certification processes, particularly if people come from known universities? It also is a question about how you invest in language, and also how we deal with legal status. I mean, it matters in terms of being able to use this human capital that's underutilized. So that's a great study. It was a very specific study. It was a short study, but it was one that we thought had enormous relevance, and it also changes the way we think about Mexican immigration patterns, because we tended to think about this as being largely low income, low skills, less educated. But in fact, not only are Asian immigrants tend to be very highly educated, so now we have about half of all recent immigrants in the United States have a college degree, largely driven by Asian and African immigrants. But it turns out that Mexican immigrants, and also South American immigrants, which we've looked at in another study, that turn out to be quite well educated as well, too. And this is probably going to keep going up as the future goes on. And partially because Mexico has higher education levels, but also there is less illegal immigration coming from Mexico today than there once was. And so people tend to come through legal streams. They tend to have higher education before they come. Now, we did a larger study, also thanks to support from the Texas-Mexico Center at SMU, where we looked at larger patterns between Mexico and the United States on immigration, or on migration flows. And I'll run through this quickly because there's a lot in this report. We did this with El Colegio de Mexico, one of Mexico's leading education institutions, and Migration Policy Institute. But we found a number of things that were fascinating. I mean, one is we know that the flows from Mexico have changed. They've gone down, particularly the unauthorized flows from Mexico have gone way down in recent years. The number of Mexicans living in the United States has actually gone down from 11.7 million in 2010 to 11.3 million in 2017. That's a drop. It's not a huge drop, but it tells you that even though Mexicans continue to arrive in the United States, more Mexicans have been going back to Mexico, which is in fact the case. About 45% of Mexicans in the United States are undocumented or unauthorized or illegal. 23% are naturalized, 32% are legal permanent residents. But even among the 45% that are unauthorized, there's a significant percentage, about 500,000, who have DACA. And so they are actually documented in some way. So the number of Mexicans who are truly undocumented in the United States, in the sense they have no legal paperwork whatsoever, is probably closer, just above a third, which is a change from the past, where it used to be a majority of the stock of those who are here in this country. We have seen about 1.2 million Mexicans return to Mexico between 2000 and 2015, some by deportation, but more actually by their own choice. And with that, they've brought U.S. citizen spouses and children. And so today, there is officially about 740,000 U.S. citizens in Mexico. The real number is probably closer to 1 million to 1.5 million. And that does include retirees, American retirees who bought a home in Mexico. It includes people who have gone to work in multinational corporations. It includes young people who are working out of a WeWork in Mexico City or Guadalajara. But the large bulk of that number are children and spouses of Mexicans who returned, who are U.S. citizens, who may in some ways be culturally Mexican, but are also very American in many ways. And that's a subject for another day, but it is a concern to think about in the future. There's it's the largest American community anywhere in the world by far, almost as many Americans as in all of Europe. We have seen, as the Mexican flow has dropped to the United States and the U.S. flow to Mexico has increased, we've also seen a huge increase in Central Americans in 2018 and 2019. They outpaced Mexicans for the first time in the unauthorized flows. They outpaced Mexicans in the unauthorized flows for a while, but heavily outpaced Mexicans in the unauthorized flows in 2018 and 2019. We've now seen a drop since June of last year, as U.S. and Mexico have implemented a number of things together to secure Mexico's southern border and make it harder for people to get in the U.S., willingly or unwillingly between the two governments. But so those numbers have dropped. Mexicans are the largest share again, but of a much smaller number. So Mexican number has gone up slightly this past year, but very, very little in 2020. We've also seen a growth of people from other countries who come up through Panama and Costa Rica, on through Central America to Mexico and then to the U.S., which has included nationals from countries in Africa and Asia, primarily South Asia, as well as Haitians and Cubans. Those numbers are dropping again, but they're still there. We what we talk about, and our sort of conclusion in this report, is that there's actually a structural convergence between Mexico and the United States on migration, but there's a political divergence. So structurally, we're closer than we've ever been before. The debate about migration between Mexico and the U.S. used to be a debate that was almost entirely about Mexican unauthorized migration to the United States. Today, that's a really small piece of the puzzle. Today, the question is really around Central American and other migrants coming through Mexico, many of them now staying in Mexico and on their way to the U.S. Mexico and the U.S. are actually much more similar. And the U.S. hosts a huge population of Mexicans, still the largest group, about a quarter of all immigrants in the U.S. are Mexicans, though it's a much smaller piece of current flows. But of the people who've arrived already, about a quarter are Mexicans, so it's still large. But by far and away, the largest immigrant group in Mexico, almost 1% of Mexico's population, is made up of U.S. citizens. And so we actually have things to talk about together. And so we lay out 5 things, and I'll just end with that quickly. One is, we need to talk about enforcement together. We do actually have to enforce our borders, and it is legitimate for both countries to do this. We have to figure out how we do it humanely and observing rule of law, but we should be doing it. 2, we have to figure out how to create labor pathways. We've actually done it with Mexicans. In our study, we say about 280,000 Mexicans on temporary visas in the U.S. In 2018, but that number went up further in 2019. It's probably closer to 350,000 or more in 2019. We haven't seen the final numbers yet. So we've created labor mobility. We haven't done it for Central Americans, and Mexico hasn't yet really done it for Central Americans except in the southern border area. So there's a huge opportunity there about figuring out how you take away some of that demand for illegal migration by creating some legal pathways. We also need to reinvent asylum and protection. There's a huge need to rethink, now that we've really undermined a lot of our asylum regime at the U.S. border, which wasn't working very well, but fit international norms. We need to reconstruct this. Mexico has been picking up the slack and doing a lot of asylum applications, but there's a real need to think together about those people that really do have protection needs in Central America. Not everyone does, but how do we actually deal with those people who are fleeing from something and who would be in danger if they're returned home? There's a huge opportunity around managing the border, the U.S.-Mexico border together. It's something we've actually done pretty effectively, even in the middle of a lot of political noise. We in fact do this quite effectively. There's a lot of growth potential there. And finally, social cohesion, how we integrate, American U.S. citizens in Mexico. This is the beginning of a conversation in Mexico right now, as well as Mexicans in the United States, and we should be learning from each other in that process. In the end, it's hard to tell because of the political noise and because of the disagreements between politicians in the governments of the two countries and the analysts in two countries, but in reality, we are actually closer together than we've ever been before structurally in how migration looks in each country. And this really does create another moment, an opportunity to sit down and think together collectively about how we manage migration in a more coordinated way. Thank you very much again to the Texas Mexico Center at SMU. You're wonderful partners. We love working with you, and we appreciate everything you do.